Here's a number that should stop you cold. In 2002, Fidelity estimated a retiring American would need $80,000 to cover healthcare and retirement. This year, that number hit $172,500 for one person. For a couple, it's $345,000, and that doesn't even include long-term care. Here's what most people over 50 still believe. $1 million means you've made it. But that number was never adjusted for what's actually waiting on the other side of retirement. So if the price of getting older has quietly tripled, what else about the $1 million number has changed without anyone telling you? The answer isn't just healthcare. It's the entire definition of what that number was ever supposed to buy. And that's what this video is about. Because if you don't understand this before you retire, you'll spend your remaining working years saving toward a target that's already outdated. My name is Alex, and if you've ever looked at your retirement accounts and felt like the number should mean more than it does, stick around. Because the math behind it has shifted more than anyone tells you. I'm going to show you why $1 million buys less than it used to, and what real, quiet financial security actually looks like once you get there. Once you understand where that number came from, you stop chasing it and start building something that actually holds. Because right now, the price tag on enough has moved again, and almost nobody adjusted for it. The illusion of the finish line. There's a specific age when most people quietly redo their retirement math, and for Dana Whitfield, that age was 54. She ran a dental practice in Frisco, Texas for almost 25 years, and somewhere around year 20, she started keeping a private tally, not written down anywhere, just a number she carried around in her head, $1 million. She figured that once her accounts hit it, she'd finally feel like she could exhale. Last spring, she got there, and the exhale never came. This is where the story stops being about Dana specifically, because what happened to her isn't personal, it's structural. When Charles Schwab asks Americans what it actually takes to be considered wealthy today, the number people give back isn't $1 million anymore. It's $2.3 million. Let that sit for a second, because it's not a small gap. It's more than double the number Dana spent 2 decades chasing. And here's the detail that makes it worse. The 2.3 million figure actually came down slightly from 2.5 million the year before. That sounds like good news until you think about why it dropped. It didn't fall because life got cheaper. It fell because people quietly lowered what they expected to have, while prices kept climbing regardless of what anyone expected. So Dana wasn't just chasing a number. She was chasing a number that had already been replaced by the time she caught it. Now you might be thinking, that's just a survey. People's opinions don't change what money actually does. Fair point. But opinions shape decisions, and decisions are exactly what's happening here. Ask a group of Americans in their 60s what wealthy means, and they'll land closer to 2.8 million. Ask someone in their 20s, and they'll say something closer to 1.7 million. Nobody's working off the same finish line. Everyone assumes theirs is the real one. This is the hedonic treadmill. And it's worth understanding because it's not a personality problem. It's just how the brain processes progress. You hit a number, your brain treats it as the new baseline within weeks, and the achievement quietly turns into a floor. Dana told me that when she pictured hitting $1 million back in her 30s, the image in her head was oddly specific. A Chevrolet Tahoe High Country paid off outright, and a modest place on Lake Texoma. Nothing extravagant, just fully hers. She has both now. She still checks her account balance with the same tightness in her chest she had when she had $60,000 saved. Here's why this actually matters for you, and not just for Dana. If your definition of enough keeps moving every time you get near it, you will never arrive. Full stop. You'll just keep running at exactly the same speed as the horizon. That's not a discipline problem. And it's not something more saving fixes on its own. It's a mechanism running quietly in the background of nearly every financial decision you make. Once you can actually see it operating, you can stop letting it choose your targets for you. But there's a second problem sitting underneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with psychology or shifting expectations at all. It has to do with what a dollar physically does in the economy compared to what it used to do. Because even if Dana had refused to let her goalpost move, even if she'd frozen it at exactly $1 million and ignored every survey ever published, the ground underneath that number had already shifted without asking her permission. The quiet erosion. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If you'd frozen $1 million in a vault back in 1980 and thought it out today, how much would it actually be worth? Not in dollars, in what it could actually buy you. The answer is about $246,000, measured in real purchasing power. That's not a typo, and that's not a small haircut. That's most of the value, quietly gone, while the number on the label never changed at all. This is the part nobody explains clearly, so let's walk through it. Roy Fenwick spent his career running the parts department at a heavy equipment dealership outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Roy is careful with numbers, the kind of guy who still balances his checkbook by hand. And when he finally crossed $1 million in savings, he did something most people never bother doing. He asked what that $1 million was actually worth, compared to $1 million 20, 30, or 40 years earlier. Turns out, inflation had already eaten a huge piece of it before he even got there. $1 million today only buys what about $514,000, bought back in the year 2000. Go back further to 1980. And today's million holds the purchasing power of roughly $246,000 from that era. The word millionaire never changed. The math underneath the word changed constantly, every single year, without ever announcing itself. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, but Roy still has $1 million sitting in his account right now, today. That's true. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. What does that money actually generate for him to live on? Most financial planners use something called the 4% rule, which is just a fancy way of saying you can safely pull about 4% of your savings out each year without running out of money. Run that math on $1 million, and you get $40,000 a year. $40,000. That's the actual functional salary a $1 million retirement produces. Not private jet money, not a fractional share in a Cessna Citation Latitude. $40,000 is roughly what a mid-level shift supervisor earns before taxes. Roy told me it was almost insulting to do that math after 30-some years of work. And honestly, I get it. So picture what that $40,000 actually has to cover. Property taxes on the house, car insurance on the Ford Explorer sitting in the driveway, groceries, which haven't exactly gotten cheaper. You're still doing math at the checkout counter. You're still deciding whether you can afford a flight to see the grandkids this year or next year. $1 million sounds like the end of financial stress. Functionally, it's a modest, careful budget with real hard edges. And remember that $40,000 has to stretch over a body that keeps getting older, and older bodies get more expensive, which is exactly where this story stops being about inflation and starts becoming about something a lot harder to plan around. The bill you didn't see coming. Quick question. When you picture your retirement budget, does it include a line item for your own body breaking down? Most people don't. And that gap is about to cost somebody a lot of money. Let's talk about Linda Marsh. Linda spent almost 30 years as an office manager for a regional trucking company outside Des Moines, Iowa. She did everything the financial books told her to do. Maxed out her 401k. That's her employer retirement account. Avoided debt. Kept her old Honda Accord running well past 200,000 miles instead of upgrading it. By the time she retired, she felt genuinely prepared. Then she ran the numbers on healthcare, and the numbers nearly knocked her out of her chair. Here's what she found. According to Fidelity's most current estimate, a single person retiring today can expect to spend around $172,500 on healthcare throughout retirement. For a couple, that number climbs to roughly $345,000. And here's the detail that really stings. That figure doesn't even include long-term care. No nursing home, no assisted living, no in-home care if it comes to that. This is just the baseline cost of staying insured and treated under Medicare, plus everything Medicare doesn't cover. Now sit with that for a second, because that's not a small percentage of $1 million retirement. That's over a third of it, gone before you've spent $1 on rent, groceries, or a single vacation. The million was never fully Linda's to spend. A massive chunk of it was already spoken for, years before she even knew the bill existed. You might be thinking, well, isn't that what Medicare is for? And that's exactly the assumption that gets people into trouble. Medicare covers a lot. It does not cover everything. And the gaps, dental work, hearing aids, vision care, and long-term prescriptions add up fast. Linda told me she genuinely thought Medicare meant healthcare was basically handled. It's not. It's a floor, not a ceiling. And there's a second piece of this that Linda's generation feels especially sharply. Confidence in Social Security has been sliding. A few years ago, a little over 4, in 10 Americans felt confident Social Security would be there for them the way they expected. That number has since dropped to roughly 36%, the lowest it's been in over a decade. So you've got rising healthcare costs on one side and shrinking confidence in one of your income sources on the other. That's not a comfortable combination, and it's exactly why so many people in their 50s and 60s feel a low hum of financial anxiety they can't quite name, even when their account balance looks fine on paper. Linda's daughter, by contrast, posts a very different kind of life online. Newly promoted, she just leased a Mercedes-Benz GLC 300 and carries a Louis Vuitton Neverfull MM everywhere she goes. Linda doesn't resent it. She just notices the contrast. Her daughter is spending against an income that feels unlimited right now. Linda is learning, the hard way, that even $1 million in the bank comes with obligations nobody put on the label. So here's the real question this leaves you with. If a huge piece of your number is already claimed before you spend a cent of it, how much of what's left can you actually get your hands on when you need it? Because as it turns out, having the money and being able to reach the money are two very different problems. The liquidity trap. Here's a strange question. Can you actually be a millionaire and still not have enough cash to pay a plumber? It sounds ridiculous. It happens to people constantly. Take Walter Hines. Walter spent 32 years as a facilities manager for a school district outside Spokane, Washington. Steady job, steady saver. The kind of guy who never carried a credit card balance in his life. By the time he hit 63, his net worth crossed $1 million, right on schedule. Then his water heater blew out on a Thursday morning, and Walter realized something uncomfortable. He didn't actually have the cash sitting around to fix it. That sounds impossible for a millionaire. So let's look at where his money actually was. Most of it was tied up in two places. His house is worth around $410,000, and his traditional IRA was built up over 3 decades of contributions. And here's the problem with both of those. You can't hand a plumber a slice of your living room. Home equity doesn't spend. It just sits there, looking valuable on paper, while the actual bill needs actual dollars today. So what about the IRA? Surely that's spendable, right? It is, eventually, but not the way most people assume. That account comes with a silent business partner Walter never quite thought about. And that partner is the federal government. Every dollar Walter put into that IRA was pre-tax, meaning he never paid income tax on it going in, which means that the account isn't really $1 million. It's $1 million minus every bit of tax he deferred for 30 years, and that bill eventually comes due. Here's where it gets more complicated. Once Walter turns 73, the government requires him to start pulling money out of that account, whether he needs it or not. It's called a required minimum distribution, and it's not optional. Miss it, and the penalty is steep. So Walter doesn't just have money locked away. He has money that will eventually be forced out into the open on the government's schedule, triggering a tax bill on income he may not even want or need that particular year. Now compare that to his neighbor a few houses down, a guy who just retired from running his own HVAC business. That neighbor recently financed a Range Rover Sport SE and talks about chartering a Cessna Citation CJ3 for a family trip to Cabo next spring. Walter isn't jealous exactly. He's just aware that looking flush and being liquid are two completely different situations. And from the outside, nobody can tell which one you're actually in. You might be thinking, okay, but Walter's still fine. He's got $1 million, he'll figure out the water heater. And sure, he did. He pulled from a smaller savings account he kept outside retirement accounts specifically for moments like this. But that's exactly the point most people miss. Being a millionaire on paper and having $1 million available to spend right now are two entirely different financial realities, and the gap between them is where a lot of retirees get caught off guard. This is the part that rarely gets talked about, honestly. The number in your net worth statement tells you what you're worth. It tells you almost nothing about what you can actually touch on a random Thursday morning when something breaks. And once you start separating those two ideas, paper wealth and usable cash, you start to understand why so many people who look financially secure are quietly stressed behind closed doors, and why that stress rarely has anything to do with how much they actually saved. The psychological toll. Here's something nobody warns you about: becoming a millionaire. The fear doesn't go away. It just changes shape and gets more expensive to have. Take Carol Nunez. Carol ran a physical therapy practice in Sarasota, Florida, for almost 28 years And for most of those years, her fear was simple. Will I have enough? Clean, obvious, motivating even. It's the fear that gets people to save in the first place. But 2 years ago, her portfolio crossed $1.1 million, and something strange happened. The old fear didn't disappear. A new one replaced it. Please don't let me lose this. That might sound like a small shift. It isn't. Think about what a 20% market drop actually feels like at different account sizes. When Carol had $40,000 saved, a 20% drop meant losing $8,000. Painful, but recoverable within a year or two of normal saving. Now, a 20% drop on her current balance means losing over $200,000 in a matter of weeks. Same percentage. Completely different gut punch. The number got bigger, and so did the fear attached to it. Here's the part that's honestly a little unfair. Carol worked for 30 years to build a cushion, and that cushion didn't buy her peace. It just gave her something larger to be afraid of losing. Is that really what all that saving was supposed to feel like? Then there's the part almost nobody talks about publicly, the social cost. Carol told me about a conversation with a longtime friend during a rough patch in the friend's marriage. The friend looked at her and said, half joking, "I hope you're not planning on selling that condo. We could really use your tax basis for the deduction." Carol laughed it off in the moment. Later, it sat with her for weeks. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being a person to that friend and started being a resource. Wealth does that. It acts like a magnifying glass on relationships, and not always in a flattering way. Friends pull back, or they lean in for the wrong reasons, and either way, something shifts. Meanwhile, Carol's business partner's son just made partner at a law firm downtown, and he's living a completely different kind of life. He leased an Audi RS6 Avant. His girlfriend carries a Hermes Birkin 30 in Togo leather, and they just put a deposit down on a condo on Longboat Key, listed at $2.4 million. From the outside, he looks like a success story. Carol knows what she knows now, that looking wealthy and carrying real quiet financial security are two entirely different experiences, and one of them comes with a lot more sleepless nights than people assume. You might be thinking, okay, but isn't this a good problem to have? Compared to not having enough at all, sure. Nobody's arguing otherwise. But it's worth being honest about what actually happens on the other side of the number, because the myth is that money resolves anxiety. What actually happens is the anxiety just gets a new address. You trade, will I have enough, for what if I lose what I built? And that second fear can be just as exhausting as the first one, just quieter and a lot less discussed at dinner parties. So if the money itself doesn't buy the peace everyone's chasing, what does? Because there's a very specific kind of wealth that doesn't come with this anxiety attached. And it looks almost nothing like what shows up on anyone's social media feed. Quiet wealth, real freedom. Here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. If you passed an actual millionaire on the street tomorrow, would you even recognize them? Probably not, and that's kind of the whole point. Let's talk about two men who live 4 houses apart in a suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. One of them is Nathan Ruiz, a project manager for a commercial construction firm. The other is his neighbor, a guy named Cody, who sells insurance and posts constantly. Cody leases a Porsche Cayenne S, wears a Rolex, and just put a deposit on a fractional NetJets share for family ski trips this winter. From the driveway, Cody looks like a success story. Nathan drives a Honda CR-V XL with 230,000 miles on it and hasn't touched his kitchen since 2009. Here's the twist nobody guesses correctly. Nathan's net worth just crossed $1.4 million. Cody's is close to zero once you subtract what he owes from what he owns. Cody isn't rich, Cody is financed. And the difference between those two things is basically everything this video has been building toward. This is where Charlie Munger's old observation actually earns its keep. He used to say the first $100,000 is a nightmare, and he wasn't exaggerating for effect. In the early years, your money isn't really growing on its own. It's growing because you keep physically shoving savings into it, month after month, with almost nothing to show for a long time. That's the grind Nathan went through in his 30s, and it's genuinely the hardest stretch. But once that baseline builds, something shifts. Compounding starts pulling real weight, and the growth stops depending entirely on you. It's less like pushing a boulder uphill, and more like watching it finally roll on its own. So how did Nathan actually get there? Not by picking some winning stock or catching a lucky break. Mostly, he just avoided doing the things that quietly wreck people's progress. He didn't upgrade his lifestyle every time he got a raise. That's lifestyle inflation. And it's the single fastest way to make more money and still feel broke. He didn't panic and sell his index funds during the 2 rough years the market gave him. And he never let debt compound against him the way Cody currently has it compounding against him. If you're looking for the actual blueprint, it's almost embarrassingly plain. First, stop attaching your emotions to the account balance itself. A number on a screen was never going to hand you inner peace, and expecting it to is how people end up disappointed, even after they succeed. Second, automate the boring stuff. Set up the contribution once, and then genuinely leave it alone for years. Third, and this is the one people skip, track the gap between what you earn and what you actually keep. Income has never been the same thing as wealth. Plenty of high earners are broke. Wealth is just what's left after everything else, and that gap is the entire game. Real wealth, the kind Nathan has, is almost invisible by design. It's the car that isn't sitting in the driveway. It's the vacation nobody posted about. It's a paid-off house and an income that shows up whether you work that month or not. And underneath all of it, it's the specific, quiet relief of never lying awake at 3 a.m. doing frightened math about how you're going to make it through the month. That's the actual finish line, not a number anyone can survey you about, and not something you could ever really see from the outside. The number was never the point. So here's what actually happened to Greg, Dana, Roy, Linda, Walter, Carol, and Nathan. They all hit the number, and the number never delivered what they thought it would, because it was never the number that was going to fix anything. A few things are worth carrying with you. Wealth isn't a finish line. It's a moving target that adjusts the second you get close. What a dollar buys matters more than what a dollar says. Money you can't touch on a Thursday morning isn't the same as money in the bank. And the fear doesn't disappear with more zeros, it just changes its name. So next time your number moves, or the market drops, or someone flashes something you don't have, ask yourself what you're actually chasing. Is it the number, or is it the feeling you assumed the number would bring? Because that feeling was never for sale. It's something you build quietly, on purpose, long before the balance ever confirms it. If any of this landed, tell me which part hit closest to home. And there's a related question worth sitting with next. What happens to that quiet wealth once you actually have to start spending it down?